After watching this, you'll understand why that guy who barely answers her texts, who cancels plans when something better comes up, who clearly doesn't put her first, that guy gets exactly what he wants. Meanwhile, you, who rearranges your entire schedule, who responds in seconds, who would do anything for her, are left waiting for crumbs of attention and wondering what you're doing wrong. You're not crazy. You've identified one of the most brutally consistent patterns in modern relationship dynamics. And here's the truth that flies in the face of decades of advice about being yourself, showing your feelings, and open communication. Strategic. Indifference isn't just a tactic. It's the fundamental posture that separates men who are chosen from those who are left begging to be chosen. Brace yourself, because what you're about to discover completely contradicts everything you've been taught about healthy relationships. It's going to hurt, but it will set you free. Because once you understand the real rules of the game, not the ones that should exist, but the ones that actually do, you will never again operate at a permanent disadvantage. I'm going to show you exactly why emotionally available men are systematically rejected, why the more you care, the less she cares, and how to become the kind of man women compete to keep instead of tolerate for convenience. The journey begins with a simple question. Are you ready to accept that reality doesn't work the way you wish it did? I'm going to start with a statement that goes against everything you've ever heard. Emotional availability doesn't create attraction. It kills attraction. And the more available you become, the faster it disappears. You know this script by heart. You meet a woman. She seems interested, you start talking, and you, because you genuinely like her, because you want this to work, do what everyone taught you to do. You become present, available, attentive. You respond quickly. You make plans around her schedule. You show you care through consistent actions. You open up your emotional world because vulnerability is strength, and honest communication builds intimacy. And at first, it works. She appreciates it. She reciprocates. She shows interest. You think, finally, someone who values a guy who treats her right. You feel validated for doing everything correctly, but then something changes, gradually or suddenly. She takes longer to reply, cancels plans, becomes busy, needs space, isn't ready for something serious, or she just vanishes, replacing you with someone who objectively treats her worse but whom she can't stop thinking about. And you're left there, completely confused, asking yourself, what happened? I did everything right. I was exactly what she said she wanted. Why didn't it work? Let me tell you what really happened. You weren't rejected despite being available and attentive. You were rejected precisely because you were available and attentive. Your kindness wasn't the problem. Your constant availability was. Your complete emotional transparency was. Your disproportionate investment was. Here's the brutal truth no one wants to admit out loud. Attraction isn't negotiated, it's felt. And it responds primarily to the perception of scarcity, not abundance. When you make yourself completely available, totally predictable, and emotionally transparent from the start, you don't create security or trust. You eliminate tension. And tension isn't the opposite of love. It's the fuel of attraction. Think about anything you truly value in your life. It could be an object, an opportunity, an experience. Now ask yourself, how much of it came easily, abundantly, without effort? Probably very little. The things you value most are those that were hard to get, scarce in some way, that required something from you to achieve. This isn't a flaw in human character. It's the fundamental economics of perceived value. I recently worked with a client who perfectly embodies this pattern. Let's call him Andrew. 32, solid career, a good guy, emotionally intelligent. He met a woman who really interested him, and he did exactly what he thought he should. He made himself completely available to her. Good morning and good night texts, check-ins during the day asking how she was, immediate availability if she needed to talk about anything, rearranging weekend plans if she wanted to meet up, total transparency about how much he was into her and where he saw it going. 3 months later, she ended it, said he was amazing, but she didn't feel that spark, that he deserved someone who would value him more, that she wasn't in the right emotional place for a relationship. All the canned phrases that essentially mean, You made it very clear that I'm your best option while you are clearly not mine. 6 months later, she's in a relationship with a guy who, in her own words to mutual friends, doesn't always answer my texts and has a ton of stuff going on in his life. She's not in this relationship because he treats her better. She's in it because he treats her like a part of his life, not the center of his existence. This isn't the exception, it's the pattern. And once you start paying attention, you see it everywhere. Your grandfather could be direct, honest, available, make his intention absolutely clear, and it would work. You know why? Because he operated in a fundamentally different relational market. Commitment had tangible social value. There was peer pressure, family expectations, community structures that made serious relationships the path of least resistance. Women had real incentives, social, economic, practical, to choose stability over excitement, predictability over mystery. But the game has been completely rewritten. Today, in an era of seemingly infinite options through apps, constant validation through social media, the absence of real social pressure to commit, and growing economic independence, the dynamics have completely inverted. Emotional availability is no longer seen as a virtue. It's interpreted as a lack of options. When you respond immediately every time, you're not showing you care. You're signaling that you have nothing more important competing for your attention. When you cancel your plans to fit her schedule, you're not demonstrating flexibility. You're communicating that your life lacks a structure important enough to defend. When you show disproportionate investment early on, you're not building a connection. You're revealing that she is your best option while you are clearly not hers. And here's the paradox that will haunt you. The more you try to prove your value through availability and effort, the more you confirm your lack of perceived value. It's like trying to convince someone you're confident by repeatedly explaining why you're confident. The very act of needing to prove it contradicts the claim. The indifferent man doesn't need to prove anything. He simply lives in a way that makes a fundamental truth obvious. He has things going on in his life that are genuinely important enough to compete for his attention. She isn't the sun he orbits. At best, she's a planet orbiting his sun. And suns don't chase planets. They simply exist, and planets are drawn in by their gravity. You can argue this is unfair, that it shouldn't work this way, that people should be valued for kindness and availability, and philosophically. Maybe you're right, but reality doesn't operate based on how things should be. It operates based on how things are, and ignoring that for the sake of idealism doesn't protect you from the consequences. It only ensures you'll keep experiencing the exact pattern that brought you here. So the question isn't whether this is fair. The question is, are you going to keep operating under rules that no longer exist? Or are you going to accept the rules that actually govern the game and learn to navigate them effectively? Every man intuitively knows that chasing makes her pull away, that pulling back makes her lean in. But most interpret this as psychological manipulation. As if women consciously decide to punish interest and reward indifference. The reality is simultaneously simpler and more brutal. It's basic economics of perceived value operating automatically below the level of conscious choice. Imagine you're buying a car. Scenario A, the salesman says, "This is the only model we have in this color. 3 people have already shown interest today. It'll probably be gone by tomorrow. I honestly don't know if it will still be here if you come back later." Scenario B, the salesman says, "Please take this car, it's been here for 6 months. I'm desperate to sell. I can lower the price, I can throw in free extras, I just need to make this sale." Which scenario increases the perceived value of the car? The answer is so obvious it feels insulting to ask. Now apply the exact same logic to your relational interactions. When you are always available, always responding, always willing to adjust your schedule, always demonstrating investment that exceeds hers, you're not being loving or attentive. You are the desperate salesman signaling you have an oversupply of a product no one else wants to buy. The indifferent man isn't playing sophisticated games. He literally has other things going on in his life that compete for his attention, projects that excite him, goals he's pursuing, friends he values, routines he maintains, hobbies that absorb him. She is not the center of his universe because his universe has a center, himself, his purpose, his mission. And that, paradoxically, makes her want to orbit him. Let me tell you about two guys I know. First, Ryan. When he meets a woman he's interested in, he becomes totally focused on her. It's as if a spotlight turns on and she's the only thing illuminated. He wants to talk constantly. He shares everything about his day. He asks detailed questions about hers. He's always available if she needs emotional support. He cancels plans with friends if she suggests meeting up. He puts personal projects on hold because a relationship is a priority. The result? It always starts strong. She appreciates the attention, feels special, reciprocates initially, but inevitably, within weeks or a few months, she starts to pull away. Needs space, is confused about what she wants, doesn't feel they're compatible even though he's such a great guy. Eventually she ends it or just fades out, and Ryan is left completely bewildered because he did everything right. Second, Marcus. When he meets a woman, he keeps his routine completely unchanged. Gym 5 times a week at the same time, a side project that consumes his Tuesday and Thursday nights. Weekends often committed to friends or hobbies. He answers texts when he genuinely has time, not when he's in the middle of something. He goes out with her when it fits naturally into his schedule, not by rearranging everything around her availability. He shares parts of his life selectively, not unloading everything at once. The result? She texts more, suggests dates, asks about what he's doing, why he took a while to respond, wants to understand his priorities. She competes for his attention. She values every moment she gets with him because it's clearly not guaranteed. And the relationship, when it forms, is between two whole people adding value to each other's lives, not one whole person carrying a needy half. What's the fundamental difference between Ryan and Marcus? It's not that Marcus is a better person or more physically attractive. It's that Marcus never made her the sun around which he orbited. He kept his own life as the priority, and she naturally became a pleasant addition, not the central purpose. Ryan turned his life into an orbit around her, and suns aren't attracted to orbiting planets. They just keep them in orbit. Now let's talk about the brutal math of disproportionate investment. Relationship dynamics operate like markets, and in markets, value is determined by the ratio of supply to demand. When your emotional investment consistently exceeds hers, you don't create reciprocity. You create imbalance, and imbalance doesn't generate attraction. It generates boredom, or worse, something close to repulsion. Think of investment as currency in a relational economic system. Every text you send is an investment. Every plan you cancel to accommodate her is an investment. Every deep emotional revelation is an investment. Every demonstration that she's more important to you than you are to her is an investment. And here's the fundamental principle that governs the value of anything. No one values what they get easily. No one. No matter what they say consciously. Take this honest mental test. Think about your last few romantic interactions. In how many of them were you significantly more emotionally invested than she was? Now, of those imbalanced interactions, how many resulted in a satisfying, long-term relationship? The correlation is brutally consistent, isn't it? The ones that worked were those where the investment was relatively balanced. The ones that failed were those where you were giving away attention, time, and emotional energy as if it were unlimited and free. Here's what happens when you operate with disproportionate investment. You are essentially selling your attention at a massive discount, and a discount communicates a clear message. This product doesn't have enough demand to command its full price. Why should you pay a premium for something the seller is desperate to give away for almost nothing? I worked with a woman a few months ago, let's call her Julia, who perfectly illustrates the other side of this dynamic. She had two guys interested in her at the same time. One, Peter, was constantly available, responded immediately, planned elaborate dates, clearly expressed how much he liked her, was obviously very invested. The other, Luke, was harder to reach, took a while to respond, sometimes cancelled plans, was less emotionally expressive, obviously less invested. Rationally, Julia knew Peter was the better choice. He treated her better, he was more reliable, more communicative. She even said literally, "I know I should choose Peter. He would be good for me. But I can't stop thinking about Luke. I don't know what it is." What she couldn't articulate consciously is that her brain was running a perceived value calculation automatically. Peter had low perceived value precisely because he was so available. Luke had high perceived value precisely because he wasn't. It had nothing to do with who was a better person. It had everything to do with who was signaling scarcity versus abundance through their behavior. Eventually, Julia chose Luke, and to the surprise of no one who understands these dynamics, as soon as she fully committed and her investment began to exceed his, Luke lost interest and ended it. Why? Because what attracted him was the tension, the challenge, the need to compete for her attention. Once she became fully available, fully invested, fully predictable, the perceived value dropped. Is this cruel? Is it shallow? Maybe, but it's real. And operating as if it isn't real because you'd prefer, it won't only ensures you'll keep being the Peter in the situation, watching as she chooses the Luke. Here's another brutal truth about investment. You literally teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. Every time you respond immediately, despite her taking hours. Every time you adjust your schedule, despite her rarely adjusting hers. Every time you invest emotionally beyond what she reciprocates, you are training her that your time, attention, and emotional energy have low value, that they don't need to be earned or reciprocated because they are given freely regardless of her behavior. And here's the part no one wants to accept. Once you establish this pattern, it's incredibly difficult to change it within the same relationship or interaction because you've already set the price. You've already communicated the value. Trying to raise the price after you've been selling cheap is seen as manipulation or an inconsistent personality change. The only way to avoid this trap is to never fall into it in the first place, to calibrate your investment from the beginning, to match hers, not exceed it in the hope that she'll eventually catch up, to keep your priorities and routines intact until she demonstrates, through consistent actions over time, that she has earned access to more of your investment. The indifferent man understands this instinctively. He isn't calculating every interaction. He simply has a full enough life that disproportionate investment is never a temptation. He doesn't have to consciously decide not to respond immediately because he was genuinely doing something else. He doesn't have to pretend to have other plans because he literally has other priorities. His scarcity is a natural consequence of having a full life, not a manipulative tactic. And that's why it works so well, because it's not a performance, it's the authenticity of someone who has built a valuable existence independent of any one person. And that authenticity communicates value in a way that no amount of tactics can replicate. Here's where the modern cultural narrative has betrayed you in the most complete way possible. You have been systematically taught that vulnerability is strength, that sharing your fears and insecurities creates intimacy, that open communication about feelings is the foundation of healthy relationships, that women want emotionally available men who process their emotions with them. All of this sounds progressive, enlightened, evolved, and it is completely counterproductive in the practice of attraction dynamics. I'm going to be absolutely direct because you need to hear this. When you open your emotional world completely to a woman too early, when you share your insecurities before establishing demonstrated value, when you use vulnerability as a tool to force intimacy, you are not building a deep connection. You are transferring an emotional burden. You become work, not a prize. Male vulnerability is only attractive when it comes from a position of demonstrated strength. When a man who has already proven himself to be capable, resilient, and emotionally stable through consistent actions and behavior chooses to share a moment of vulnerability, it creates connection because it's perceived as a rare gift. She has gained access to something you don't show easily. It's a conscious choice to open up, not a desperate need for emotional validation. But when vulnerability is your default posture, when you use emotional confession as currency to create premature intimacy, when you dump your insecurities, fears, and emotional needs right at the beginning, you become another source of emotional need in her life, not a refuge from the world's demands. Think of a fortress. It has high walls, heavy gates, watchtowers. Inside, there are secret gardens, hidden chambers, guarded treasures. When you allow someone inside after that person has proven themselves worthy through time, consistency, and their own investment, the experience is profound. They had to earn entry. They had to demonstrate value. Access was won, not given. Now imagine you simply remove all the walls before anyone arrives. There are no gates to cross, no mystery to unravel, no sense of accomplishment in reaching the interior. You haven't facilitated connection. You've eliminated the desire to connect. Why? Because achievement is what creates psychological value. What comes easy is easily discarded. Premature vulnerability is exactly this. You are giving full access to your most intimate emotional spaces before anyone values that access enough. And once you see this dynamic, you can't unsee it. In every relationship that failed, there was likely a moment, maybe you realized it in real time, maybe only in hindsight, where you shared too much, too soon, and something shifted in how she saw you. I worked with a guy, let's call him Philip, who perfectly exemplifies this trap. He met a woman, strong initial chemistry, a few excellent dates, and then on their third time seeing each other, she asked about past relationships. A common question, right? But instead of giving a surface-level answer and moving on, Philip saw it as an opportunity to be vulnerable and authentic. He spent the next hour describing in detail how his last relationship ended, how much it hurt him, how he was still processing the pain, his insecurities about not being good enough, his fears about opening up again. He teared up a bit. She listened, seemed understanding, said the right things, but her interest died that night. Not immediately. It took a few weeks of gradual distancing until she eventually said she didn't feel that strong of a connection. Why? Philip interpreted it as she wasn't ready for someone emotionally available. The reality? He dumped a massive emotional load on her before establishing any foundation of demonstrated value. He became an emotional project, not a potential partner. Here's the crucial distinction no one explains. There's a huge difference between being emotionally stable versus emotionally open. Emotional stability is attractive. It means you process your experiences internally. You have support structures. You don't need constant validation to function. Premature emotional openness, on the other hand, often signals the opposite: a need for external validation, a lack of internal processing, the use of others as unpaid therapists. Women say they want vulnerable men because consciously they genuinely believe it. They value vulnerability in friends. They appreciate when men in their lives can share emotions. But attraction doesn't operate on the conscious level of stated values. It operates on the instinctual level of perceived value signals. And premature vulnerability signals a polarity reversal. You need her emotional support before you've established that you can provide support for her. Consider how this works when done correctly. You meet someone. You project competence, stability, an interesting life. You don't hide that you're human, but you also don't use her as an emotional confessional. Months go by. She sees through your actions that you are reliable, capable, emotionally regulated. And then, at a specific moment where the context makes sense, you share something genuinely personal, maybe about a significant challenge you overcame, maybe about a loss you processed, maybe about a fear you faced. That moment creates deep intimacy because she has already established in her mind that you are valuable. The vulnerability doesn't define you. It complements an image of a multidimensional man. She doesn't have to hold you up emotionally because you've already demonstrated you hold yourself up. The sharing is a gift, not a burden. This is vulnerability from a position of strength, completely different from vulnerability from a position of need. Here's another pattern I see repeatedly. Men who were taught to process emotions together essentially turn women into their unpaid therapists. Every stress from work needs to be discussed in detail. Every conflict with a friend needs a joint analysis. Every personal insecurity needs her validation. This isn't an emotional partnership. It's unilateral emotional labor. And labor isn't attractive. Compare that to the indifferent man. He has a rich emotional life, but he processes it internally or with appropriate support structures, close friends, maybe a therapist, maybe through physical or creative activities. He doesn't use his romantic partner as the primary dumping ground for everything he's feeling, not because he's repressed, but because he has healthy channels for processing that don't depend on her. When he shares with her, it's selective, meaningful. It's not a daily emotional dump. It's an intentional sharing of things that truly matter. And because it's rare, it's valued. Because it doesn't come with an expectation that she needs to solve or validate it, it's appreciated, not dreaded. This might sound cold, like I'm advocating for emotional repression or a lack of authenticity. I'm not. I'm advocating for discrimination about with whom, when, and how you share your vulnerabilities. I'm advocating for building a foundation of perceived value before depositing your entire emotional life onto someone. I'm advocating for being whole enough that your vulnerability is an addition to your depth, not a substitute for a lack of it. The brutal truth is, women don't want to be your therapists. They want to be partners to men who have already done the work of understanding and managing their own emotional experiences. Shared vulnerability from a position of strength is intimate. Exposed vulnerability from a position of need is exhausting. And here's the test. If you remove her emotional availability, if she were no longer there to process your emotions with you, would your emotional life collapse? Or do you have sufficient structures in place that she is a valuable addition, but not a fundamental necessity? The answer to that question determines whether your vulnerability comes from strength or weakness. The man no woman can manipulate isn't emotionally closed off. He is emotionally self-sufficient. He processes. He feels, he even shares, but he does it all from a position where her presence is a desired choice, not a necessary crutch. And that emotional independence is infinitely more attractive than desperate openness. Modern society has sold you a specific and completely counterproductive fantasy, that women want men who openly communicate about absolutely everything, who verbalize every feeling, who are always willing to process any situation, who don't keep anything private or internal. Total transparency as the ultimate ideal of a healthy relationship. And technically, on a conscious and rational level, many women genuinely believe they want this. If you ask them, they'll say, I want someone who communicates. I want someone who's open. I want someone who shares their thoughts and feelings with me. It sounds reasonable, it sounds healthy, it sounds mature, but observe actual behavior, not ideological statements. Observe which men they chase, which ones they fantasize about, which ones they say they can't quite figure out. It's not the guy who is always available for long talks about the relationship. It's not the guy who verbalizes every thought and feeling. It's the guy who has a depth she's still discovering, motivations she's still trying to understand, parts of his life that remain mysterious and intriguing. Mystery isn't deception. Mystery isn't playing games. Mystery is simply maintaining boundaries about what you share, when you share it, and in how much detail. It's the art of revealing yourself, gradually in layers, making each revelation feel like a privilege earned through time and demonstrated value, not an assumed right from the first date. Think of the difference between reading a book where everything is explicitly explained in the first chapter versus one where you piece together clues, form theories, and are surprised by well-placed revelations. Which one holds your attention? Which one do you reread? Which one do you recommend to friends because you can't stop thinking about it? The man who communicates everything up front is like the book that spoils all its own plot twists in the introduction. It might be healthier in some abstract theory of relationships, but it's fundamentally less engaging in the real practice of attraction. The woman who says she wants total communication is often the same one who loses interest when you completely fulfill that request. Why? Because attraction operates on tension, and tension requires gaps. Gaps between what is known and unknown. Intervals between availability and absence. The difference between what you readily show and what remains private until it's properly earned. Eliminate all the gaps and you eliminate all the tension. And without tension, there's no electricity, no curiosity, no element. Thov, I need to understand more about this guy that keeps her thinking about you. I recently worked with a woman, let's call her Megan, who was in the early stages with two guys simultaneously. First, Daniel. He had told her his entire life story by the third week. He shared details of his day every day. He verbalized exactly what he was feeling about her. There was nothing about him she didn't know or couldn't predict. Second, Tyler. She knew the basics about him, but there were layers she was still uncovering. He would mention things in passing that made her curious but wouldn't elaborate immediately. He had hobbies and interests she was gradually learning about, parts of his life he didn't share freely, but that she was slowly gaining access to. Rationally, Megan appreciated Daniel's openness. It's so refreshing to have someone who communicates so well, she said. But emotionally, she was obsessed with Tyler. I feel like I'm constantly discovering new layers to him, she explained. I don't know. There's just something about not completely knowing everything about him that makes me want to know more. Eventually, she chose Tyler, not because he communicated less well, but because his communication was metered, strategic, revealed in layers. Every discovery about him felt like an achievement. Daniel, on the other hand, dumped everything at once, and once she had the complete map of who he was, there was no more territory to explore. Here's the psychological principle at work. Humans are naturally curious and motivated by mystery. When something is completely known, completely predictable, completely transparent, it loses its fascination. Not because it's bad, but because there's no more discovery possible. It's fully mapped out. There are no more surprises. There's no more of that, what will I discover about this person? Today? Element. The indifferent man understands this, not because he read a manual on relationship dynamics, but because he naturally keeps parts of his life private, not for manipulation, but because he genuinely believes not everything needs to be shared immediately. Some aspects of who he is reveal themselves with time. Some experiences he shares selectively with people who have proven they deserve that level of access. He doesn't tell his whole life story on the first date, not because he's hiding something, but because it feels overwhelming and unnecessary. He doesn't verbalize every thought he has about her. Not because he's playing hard to get, but because processing internally before sharing is his natural default. He isn't always available for long talks about the relationship because he has other things demanding his mental attention. And all of this creates what psychologists call a curiosity gap, that space between what is known and what is yet to be discovered. This gap is what sustains interest over time. It's what makes her pay attention when you do share something. It's what makes every revelation about you feel significant instead of just another item on an already exhaustive list of information you've dumped. Compare this to the overcommunicator. Within weeks, he has shared practically everything. She knows his entire past. She knows exactly what he thinks about everything. She has full access to his every thought and feeling. There is no more mystery, no more discovery. There is only maintenance of something completely known. And here's the brutal truth. Completely known is indistinguishable from completely predictable, and completely predictable is, eventually, indistinguishable from completely boring. Not because the person is boring, but because there's nothing new to discover. The map is complete. The territory is fully explored. Now you might be thinking, but this sounds like playing games, like manipulation. Let me be clear about the distinction. Manipulation is when you consciously withhold information or create artificial mystery with the specific intent of controlling her level of interest. That is calculated, false, and unsustainable. What I'm describing is different. It's simply not feeling the compulsion to share absolutely everything immediately. It's keeping some things private, not as a strategy, but because privacy is your natural default. The difference is authenticity versus performance. The authentically mysterious man isn't performing mystery. He just doesn't see the need to completely open up his inner life to someone who hasn't yet proven, through time and consistent investment, that they have earned access to that level of intimacy. He answers questions, but doesn't over-elaborate unless he feels a genuine desire to. He shares experiences, but doesn't recount every detail of every story. He reveals opinions, but doesn't turn every conversation into a complete exposition of his life philosophy. There's a natural economy in how he shares that always leaves room for more discovery. And here's the crucial aspect. This doesn't mean being closed off or distant. It means being selective. It means that when you do share, it has weight. It means revelations are significant events, not daily occurrences. It means access to your inner life is earned and therefore valued. The woman who is with a man like this never feels like she knows everything completely. She's always discovering a new facet, a new interest, a new perspective. He remains intriguing not because he's hiding things, but because he feels no need to display everything up front. And this continuous discovery is what keeps attraction alive over the long term. Compare that to a relationship where everything was shared in the first few months. There are no more surprises, no more revelations. There is only the continuation of what is already completely known. And what is completely known, however wonderful, eventually becomes familiar. And familiar, without an element of continuous discovery, can slowly morph into taken for granted. The man no woman can manipulate doesn't play games with information. He simply values his privacy enough not to hand over full access immediately. He shares strategically, not indiscriminately. And that strategy doesn't come from a seduction handbook. It comes from natural self-respect and an understanding that genuine intimacy is built gradually, not dumped prematurely. Here's the mistake that destroys more men than any other. They make the woman the central purpose of their lives instead of a valuable addition to an already existing purpose. And this subtle inversion is absolutely toxic to attraction. I'll explain exactly why. Attractive men have missions, clear goals that predate any specific woman, lives structured around personal growth, professional ambitions, creative projects, physical development, established social circles. The woman doesn't complete this world. She might earn entry to it if she proves herself valuable enough over time. She is a desired addition, but not an essential component. His world exists complete without her, and would be slightly enriched with her. Unattractive men do the complete opposite. When they meet someone who interests them, that person instantly becomes the gravitational center around which everything else begins to orbit. Fitness plans are adjusted to accommodate her availability. Time with friends is sacrificed to be available whenever she wants to meet. Personal projects are put on hold because the relationship is the priority. Essentially, life pauses to accommodate this new central presence. And here's why this fails so consistently. You cannot be an attractive person if you don't have an attractive life first. If your life had no structure, direction or purpose before she showed up, adding her doesn't magically create it. It just makes your lack of purpose more obvious, heavier, and more suffocating for her. Consider this question with brutal honesty. If she disappeared tomorrow, literally walked out of your life completely, what would be left? Would you still have meaningful routines that you maintain with discipline, concrete goals you're actively pursuing, valuable relationships you've consistently cultivated, projects that excite you regardless of an audience? Or would her removal create a vast void because she had essentially become the entire content of your existence? If the answer is the second option, you've already lost. Not just with her, but with anyone. Because she can feel it. Women have developed highly calibrated sensors to detect when they've become the entire purpose of a man's existence. And this doesn't generate security, appreciation, or intimacy. It generates suffocation, an excessive weight, the responsibility for another person's total happiness, a burden no one wants to carry. I recently worked with a guy, let's call him Brian, who perfectly illustrates this destructive pattern. 30 years old, stable job, occasional hobbies, friends he saw once in a while, an okay life, but without a strong direction or particular passion. He met a woman who really made an impact on him, and literally overnight she became his main project. The gym he sporadically attended was abandoned because the times didn't align with her availability. A side project he was developing was paused because I don't have time now that I'm investing in the relationship. Friends he used to see frequently were gradually forgotten because she needs me, or I'd rather spend time with her. Individual hobbies were replaced by only doing things they could do together. Within 3 months, Brian's entire life revolved around her. Every decision was filtered through, how does this affect our relationship? Every free hour was dedicated to her. Every thought eventually returned to her. He essentially dissolved his individual identity into a completely relational one. The result? She started to feel suffocated. She began to feel she was carrying his entire emotional weight. She started to realize he didn't have his own life, just a life that orbited hers. And that, instead of making her feel valued, made her feel overwhelmed. She eventually ended it saying she needed someone more independent. Brian was devastated. But here's the brutal truth. He didn't lose a relationship. He lost the substitute he was using in place of having his own purpose. And that's why it hurt so much. Because she wasn't just a valuable person in his life. She was his life. Compare this to a guy I know. Let's call him Richard. When he met someone interesting, he continued exactly as he was. Gym 5 times a week because health is a non-negotiable priority. A software development side project because learning and growth are fundamental parts of who he is. Friday nights with close friends because those relationships have been cultivated for years and have independent value. Photography. and hiking hobbies because they fill him with purpose regardless of an audience. She didn't become the sun he orbited. She gained entry to his solar system, where he was the sun, and several other planets, work, friends, projects, health, also orbited him. She was an additional planet, maybe eventually an important one, but not the only one, not the one that defined the whole system. The result? She competed for his attention. She valued every moment with him because it was clearly not guaranteed. He had other legitimate priorities. She respected him because she saw a man with a complete and interesting life who chose to include her, not an empty man desperate for her to fill the void. The fundamental difference: Brian was looking to complete himself through the relationship. Richard was looking to complement an already complete life. Brian made her his purpose. Richard made her a valuable addition to his existing purposes. Brian was incomplete without her. Richard was complete regardless of her, and potentially more complete with her. Here is a principle that has no exceptions. Attraction requires you to be a whole person first. Whole doesn't mean perfect. Whole means you have a life structure. That makes sense independent of any specific person. It means you wake up with a purpose that doesn't depend on someone's presence. It means your days have meaning that comes from within, not from without. When you are a whole person, a relationship is an addition. When you are an incomplete person, a relationship is a desperate attempt to fill a void, and women feel the difference instantly. They may not articulate it consciously, but they know the difference between a man who wants them versus a man who needs them, between a man who is choosing to share an already valuable life versus a man who needs them to make life tolerable. Here's a simple test. Imagine you have a completely free week. No work commitments, no social obligations, no specific person to see. How would you fill that week? If your immediate answer is, I'd try to spend as much time as possible with her, or, I don't know, I'd probably get bored, you have a fundamental problem. You don't have enough of your own life to sustain long-term attraction. But if your answer is a detailed list of projects you'd advance, skills you'd develop, experiences you'd seek, books you'd read, places you'd explore, you have the foundation of a whole person. And a whole person who chooses to include someone in their life is infinitely more attractive than an empty person who needs someone to fill their time. The indifferent man doesn't pretend to have a busy and interesting life. He literally has one because he has built an existence independent of any specific woman. When he goes out with her, it's a pleasurable break from other priorities. When he spends time with her, it's a conscious choice to share a valuable moment, not a desperate need to fill a void. When he invests in her, it's a strategic decision to allocate a limited resource, his time and attention, to someone who has demonstrated corresponding value. And here is the final paradox that will close this block. The more you need the relationship to feel complete, the less attractive you become within it. The less you need it, but still choose to be in it, the more attractive you remain. Not because playing hard to get works, but because genuine completeness is magnetically attractive, while desperate neediness is universally repulsive. The woman no man can manipulate also doesn't want a man she can manipulate. She wants a man with a life so complete that manipulation is irrelevant because he doesn't need her enough to compromise his values, abandon his priorities, or sacrifice his purposes. She wants a man who chooses her because she adds value, not because she fills a desperate need. And you only become that man when you stop making the relationship your purpose and start making the relationship a reflection of your existing purposes. When your life is so rich, so full, so meaningful regardless of any one person, that adding someone is a desired complement, not an essential component. This is the ultimate freedom, and paradoxically, it's what makes you more capable of building a healthy relationship than any amount of excessive availability ever could. There is a fundamental and immutable principle in all relationship dynamics that no one wants to admit, because it sounds cynical, because it seems to reduce love to a power game, because it contradicts the romantic narrative we've been fed since childhood. But it's true, tested thousands of times across millions of interactions. The person who is less emotionally invested holds more power in the dynamic, always, without exception. This doesn't mean that healthy relationships are conscious power games. It means that a healthy balance emerges naturally when both parties have sufficiently complete lives that the relationship is a desired choice, not a desperate need. But when investment is asymmetrical, when one person cares dramatically more than the other, the dynamic becomes implicitly hierarchical, regardless of the intentions or stated values of anyone involved. The less invested person defines the terms, the pace, the boundaries of the interaction. They decide when you meet. They determine the frequency of communication. They establish the level of intimacy. The more invested person accommodates these conditions, justifies behaviors they wouldn't accept from other people, rationalizes treatment they objectively recognize as substandard. And here's the truly brutal part. This imbalance rarely corrects itself. It usually amplifies progressively until the less invested person leaves, or the more invested person finally burns out completely. How many times have you found yourself doing mental gymnastics to justify behavior you objectively wouldn't tolerate from other people in your life? Excessive and inconsistent delays in responding to messages, frequent cancellations of plans with vague excuses, chronic ambiguity about the status or direction of the relationship, an obvious lack of reciprocity in effort, attention, or emotional investment. If a friend treated you this way, you would probably pull away or have a direct conversation about the pattern, but when it's someone you're romantically invested in, you find explanations. She's going through a tough time. He's just busy with work. She has commitment anxiety from past relationships. He's just not one to express his emotions. You give the benefit of the doubt repeatedly. You convince yourself it's temporary, that it will get better once insert condition that never actually materializes. Why? Because you care more. And because you care more, you tolerate more. And because you tolerate more, your behavior communicating low value becomes the accepted standard. And because that becomes the accepted standard, she respects you less. It's a self-perpetuating cycle that only ends when you fundamentally change your posture from hyper-invested to appropriately indifferent. Indifference here doesn't mean not caring at all. It means calibrating your investment to exactly match hers, not exceeding it in the naive hope that disproportionate unilateral investment will eventually inspire equivalent reciprocity. It means recognizing that you cannot love someone into loving you back. You cannot try hard enough to compensate for her lack of effort. You cannot invest so much emotionally that she eventually feels obligated to match it. I recently worked with a woman, let's call her Laura, who perfectly illustrates this dynamic from the other side. She was seeing two guys at the same time in the beginning. First, Greg. He was clearly very invested. Constant texts, proactive planning of dates, clear expression of interest and intent, always available when she wanted attention. She was obviously a high priority for him. Second, Frank. He was harder to reach. Responsive when convenient, not necessarily when she wanted. Sometimes cancelled plans if something more important came up. Less expressive about his feelings. Clearly had a busy life where she was one part, not the center. Obviously less invested than Greg. Laura told me literally, rationally I know Greg would be better for me. He treats me incredibly well. He's attentive, consistent, communicative. But I can't stop thinking about Frank. There's something about not being able to completely have him that makes me obsessed. With Greg, I feel like I've already won. With Frank, I feel like I'm still competing. She eventually chose Frank, not because he was a better person, not because he treated her better, but because the power dynamic favored him. He was less invested, which paradoxically made her invest more. Greg was more invested, which made her invest less because she already had full access without effort. And here is the ironic detail. As soon as Laura fully committed to Frank, as soon as she became the more invested person in the dynamic, he lost interest. Why? Because what attracted him wasn't her specifically. It was the tension, the challenge, the need to compete for her attention. Once she became fully available, fully invested, fully predictable, the perceived value dropped. Is this shallow? Maybe. But it's real. And ignoring real patterns because we'd prefer them to be different doesn't protect you from the consequences. It just ensures you'll continue to be the Greg of the situation, watching while the person you treat well chooses the one who treats them with strategic indifference. Here's an even deeper truth about asymmetric investment. You literally teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. Every time you respond immediately, despite her consistently taking hours. Every time you adjust your entire schedule, despite her rarely adjusting hers. Every time you invest emotionally beyond what she reciprocates, you are actively training her that your time, attention, and emotional energy have low value, that they don't need to be earned because they are given freely, that they don't need to be reciprocated because you provide them regardless of her behavior, that there is no consequence for her lack of effort because you compensate with your excess of effort. You are essentially programming the dynamic for permanent imbalance through your behavioral responses. And here's the part no one wants to accept. Once you establish this pattern within a specific interaction, it is extremely difficult to change it. Because you've already set the terms, you've already communicated the value. Suddenly trying to have more boundaries, be less available, demand more reciprocity, all of this is perceived as a manipulative change of tactics, not an authentic expression of increased value. It's like negotiating a salary. If you accept a low initial offer trying to renegotiate for double 6 months later without a dramatic change in your responsibilities, is seen as unjustified. You already accepted that value. You already signaled you were willing to work for that price. Raising the price later seems opportunistic. The same dynamic in relationships. If you establish a pattern of disproportionate investment, from the beginning trying to recalibrate later feels like manipulation, not a correction of imbalance. The only way to avoid this trap is to never fall into it in the first place. Calibrate your investment from day one. Match hers, don't exceed it, hoping for future reciprocity. But here is a crucial principle. Relational power isn't about domination or control. It's about balance. When both parties are similarly invested, when neither needs the other more, when both choose to be present for the added value rather than the need to fill a void, there is no power hierarchy. There is a partnership. The problem arises exclusively from asymmetry, and asymmetry arises when one person makes the relationship their central purpose, while the other treats the relationship as a complement to an already existing purpose. When one person accommodates everything while the other maintains boundaries. When one person tolerates anything to keep the connection, while the other is willing to walk away if standards aren't met. The indifferent man doesn't seek power over the woman. He simply refuses to accept a position of less power. He will not invest more than she invests. He will not tolerate treatment he wouldn't tolerate from others. He will not make her a bigger priority than she makes him. Not because he's playing games, but because he genuinely values himself enough to demand basic reciprocity. And here's what happens when you operate from this posture. Either she matches your investment, creating a balanced and healthy dynamic, or she doesn't, revealing that she doesn't value you enough to justify additional investment from you. Both outcomes are victories. In the first case, you have a functional relationship. In the second, you have preserved your time and emotional energy for someone who will eventually value them properly. The only losing outcome is to continue investing disproportionately, hoping she will eventually wake up and realize your value. That never happens. Either she already sees your value and invests accordingly, or she doesn't, and will never see it more clearly through more of your investment. Continued disproportionate investment only confirms in her mind that you don't have enough value to command equal investment. So here is the brutal choice. Do you accept a position of less power, patiently waiting for her to eventually value you more? Or do you demand balance from the start, knowing that this means some people will walk away, but the ones who stay will stay on fair terms? The first option seems safer because you keep the person. The second option seems riskier because you might lose them. But here's what you eventually learn. Keeping someone through disproportionate investment is not a victory. It's a prison where you constantly work to deserve something that should be freely given if it truly had value for her. The only real victory is to be chosen by someone who invests as much as you do, who values you as much as you value them, who makes you a priority because you genuinely deserve to be, not because you begged hard enough. And you only achieve that when you stop accepting crumbs and start demanding a feast, when you stop being grateful for basic attention and start expecting real effort, when you stop celebrating every little sign of interest as if it were a major achievement and start recognizing that genuine interest doesn't require interpretation. It's obvious, consistent, and reciprocal. The man no woman can manipulate isn't immune to manipulation through sophisticated technique or superhuman willpower. He is immune because he has built a life where losing any specific person doesn't collapse his entire structure, where his value isn't determined by how much someone values him, where his happiness doesn't depend on external approval, where his purpose exists independent of any relationship. And when you operate from this position of genuine strength, power dynamics balance automatically, because you don't need her more than she needs you. You choose her as much as she chooses you. You invest proportionally to her investment, and if that balance doesn't exist, you are willing to walk away because preserving your own value is more important than preserving access to someone who doesn't value you properly. This is strategic indifference at its core. It's not pretending not to care. It's genuinely caring more about maintaining your standards than about keeping a specific person who doesn't meet those standards. And paradoxically, that is exactly the posture that makes people want to meet your standards. So how do you escape the trap of excessive availability? How do you transform from a man women tolerate for convenience into a man they compete to keep? How do you recalibrate years of social conditioning that taught you to demonstrate value through constant availability? First, understand that this is not about playing games or manipulation. It's not about artificial tactics to seem less interested than you really are. It's about reclaiming genuine balance in your life. It's about restoring natural priorities where you are the center of your own existence, not a satellite orbiting someone else. Strategic indifference works precisely because it's not artificial when done correctly. It's not a performance. It's the restoration of a healthy, natural life structure where you have purposes, goals, and standards that predate any specific person. You don't pretend to be busy. You become genuinely busy with things that matter regardless of any woman. You don't deliberately ignore teen texts to play hard to get. You simply respond when you naturally have time, because your life has other legitimate demands competing for your attention. You don't withhold vulnerability manipulatively. You share it selectively with people who have demonstrated, through time and their own consistent investment, that they have earned access to that level of intimacy. The difference between a manipulative strategy and an authentic posture is this: manipulation is a conscious tactic calculated to get a specific result. Authenticity is the natural expression of values and priorities already established as fundamental to who you are. Here are the specific, practical principles for recalibration. Principle 1. Rebuild your independent life. First, before anything else, you need to have a life that works completely without any specific person. This means fitness routines you maintain religiously, professional or creative projects that you advance consistently, a social circle you actively cultivate, hobbies that genuinely absorb you, personal goals you pursue with discipline. Don't build this to seem attractive. Build it because a complete life is a requirement for being a complete person. And a complete person is the only type who can build a healthy relationship. If you are entering a romantic interaction as an incomplete person expecting to be completed, you are already set up for failure. You are offering a burden, not a partnership. Test. If you woke up tomorrow and discovered you were single indefinitely, would your week have a meaningful structure? Would your days have a clear purpose? Or would you be adrift waiting for the next romantic distraction to give your existence meaning? Principle 2. Calibrate your investment to hers, never exceeding it, expecting future reciprocity. Observe how much effort she puts into the interaction, how long it consistently takes her to respond, how much she adjusts her schedule, how much she invests emotionally, how much she initiates contact, how much she plans dates, how much she demonstrates interest through actions, not just words. Then match that level exactly, no more. If she takes 3 hours to respond on average, you also take 3 hours. If she occasionally cancels plans, you also maintain your other priorities and cancel when necessary. If she shares selectively, you also share selectively. If she invests 30% of her available energy, you invest 30% of yours. Does this sound calculated? Perhaps, but it's healthier than the alternative where you invest 90% while she invests 30%, creating an unsustainable imbalance that eventually results in your resentment or her loss of respect. Principle 3. Maintain your non-negotiable priorities. Identify 3 to 5 things in your life that are absolutely non-negotiable. Maybe it's regular exercise. Maybe it's an important professional project. Maybe it's time with family or close friends. Maybe it's a hobby that defines part of who you are. Whatever they are, they don't change to accommodate someone until that person has proven over a considerable amount of time that they have earned a level of importance that justifies reconsideration. When she wants to meet up, but it conflicts with your gym routine, you don't cancel the gym. You offer an alternative time that works without sacrificing your priority. When she wants to talk, but you're in the middle of important work, you don't drop everything. You tell her you'll call back when you're finished. When she wants you to cancel plans with friends, you don't cancel. You explain that those commitments are important and offer your next real availability. This isn't being inflexible or selfish. It's demonstrating that you have a structured life that doesn't dissolve the moment someone interesting shows up. And paradoxically, this makes you infinitely more attractive than the man who immediately rearranges everything. Principle 4. Share selectively, not indiscriminately. You don't need to tell your whole life story on the first few dates. You don't need to verbalize every thought and feeling. You don't need to process every emotion with her. Keep some things private, not because you're hiding them, but because not everything needs to be shared immediately with everyone. When she asks questions, answer honestly, but not necessarily exhaustively. Give enough information without over-elaborating. Let her ask follow-up questions if she wants to know more. Don't anticipate everything she might want to. Know and dump it on her beforehand. Vulnerability should be metered and earned. Share vulnerable moments when the context makes sense and after she has demonstrated her own reciprocity. Don't use vulnerability as a tool to force premature intimacy. Principle 5. Accept that some will leave, and that's a feature, not a bug. Here's the hard truth. Some relationships simply will not survive this recalibration, and that's perfectly okay. In fact, it's great, because if the only reason someone was in your life was because you were always available and overly accommodating, then what you had wasn't a relationship based on genuine mutual value. It was a one-sided arrangement of convenience where you provided utility while receiving crumbs. When you stop being convenient, the people who were only there for the convenience leave. This hurts temporarily, but it frees you up for genuine connections with people who value you as a whole person, not as a useful, always available extension of themselves. The woman who truly values you will not pull away when you have healthy boundaries. She won't disappear when you demonstrate functional self-respect. She won't lose interest when you maintain a complete life outside of her. She will respect it. She will be attracted to it. She will compete to maintain privileged access because she will recognize that you are not a given. But the woman who was only there because you were a convenient, effortless option, she will leave as soon as you are no longer so convenient. And you should celebrate that, not mourn it, because she was wasting time you could have been investing in someone genuine. Principle 6. Be patient with the process. If you've spent years operating a certain way, change doesn't happen instantly. You will feel the old urges. You will want to respond immediately when she finally texts back after hours. You will want to cancel your plans when she suggests meeting up. You will want to demonstrate excessive investment to prove your interest. These urges are old neural pathways dying slowly. Acknowledge them, observe them, but do not act on them. Respond when you genuinely have time, not when your desperate impulse demands. Keep your plans when they are important. Don't cancel them out of a people-pleasing reflex. Over time, your default posture will shift organically. It will go from "how can I prove my value to her" to "is she adding enough value to my complete life to justify significant space in it?" This frame inversion is everything, and it requires patience because decades of conditioning are not undone in weeks. Principle 7. Recognize this isn't about her, it's about you. The recalibration is not a tactic to make a specific woman want you more. It is a restoration of personal balance that makes you a more complete, more attractive, more respectable person. If it works with her specifically, great. If it doesn't, you are still better off for having recalibrated because you now operate from a position of completeness instead of neediness. The goal is not to get the girl. The goal is to become the type of man that quality women naturally want to be around. And that type of man has a complete life, clear standards, functional boundaries, and enough self-respect to walk away from situations that do not serve him. When you operate from this posture, your relationship outcomes improve as a natural consequence, not because you learned manipulation techniques, but because you became a more valuable version of yourself, and genuine value attracts genuine interest. Marci's conclusion, the final truth about strategic indifference. So, here we are at the end, and it's time for a complete synthesis. Time to connect all the dots we've developed along this journey. Time to articulate the final truth that no one wants to say out loud, but that every successful man in relationships understands intuitively. The central truth is brutally simple. You cannot negotiate desire. You cannot create attraction through availability. You cannot inspire respect through constant accommodation. You cannot generate investment through disproportionate investment. You cannot be chosen for demonstrated value through demonstrated neediness. Attraction is a response to perceived value, and perceived value comes primarily from scarcity, not abundance, from mystery, not total transparency, from individual completeness, not desperate need, from functional boundaries, not limitless accommodation, from calibrated investment, not a unilateral donation of emotional energy. Men who understand this deeply don't need to play games because they have structured their lives in a way that scarcity is a natural consequence of having purposes, goals, and standards that predate any specific person. They don't withhold attention manipulatively. They simply have other things legitimately competing for it. They don't feign indifference. They are appropriately indifferent because no individual woman is essential to their sense of value or life direction. And paradoxically, this makes them infinitely more attractive than men who would do anything, sacrifice everything, and tolerate any treatment to keep someone interested. Because attraction doesn't respond to sacrifice. It responds to value. And value requires you to maintain your own worth, instead of dissolving into a desperate need to be chosen. Every example I've shown, from Ryan, who became completely available and was discarded, to Megan, who chose the less accessible guy, to Brian, who dissolved his life into his relationship, to Laura, who couldn't stop thinking about the one who valued her less, they all illustrate the same fundamental principle. An imbalance of investment destroys attraction. When you care more, you lose more. When you tolerate more, you receive less. When you invest more, you are valued less. Not because people are naturally cruel, but because value is a function of scarcity, and you cannot be scarce when you are unlimitedly available. The world has changed. The rules have changed dramatically, and continuing to operate under an old paradigm where availability, transparency, and excessive effort create attraction is a guarantee of continued frustration. You can resist this truth. You can argue that it's cynical, that it's manipulative, that it's unfair, that people should value kindness and effort. And philosophically, maybe you're absolutely right. Maybe the world should work that way. Maybe people should choose partners based on who treats them best instead of who makes them work hardest for attention. Maybe healthy relationships should be about total communication and mutual availability. But while you argue about how things should be, observe the world around you. Observe which men have the relationship dynamics you envy. Observe not their public statements about healthy relationships, but their actual behavior in their interactions. You will see the pattern confirmed repeatedly across thousands of examples. They keep their own lives as the highest priority. They have clearly defined and defended boundaries. They share selectively instead of indiscriminately. They calibrate investment instead of giving everything away up front. They remain mysterious because they feel no compulsion to reveal everything. They are appropriately indifferent because they have built complete existences where no single person is essential. And you will see women orbit them naturally, actively compete for their attention, value every moment of access because it's not guaranteed, respect them because they demonstrate self-respect first, invest in them because they don't invest disproportionately first, not because these men are exceptionally attractive, physically or financially wealthy, but because they have structured their lives and interactions in a way that their time, their attention, and their emotional investment are perceived as scarce and therefore valuable. They have become prizes to be won instead of conveniences to be used. The final choice is yours, and yours alone. You can continue being the completely available, totally transparent, excessively invested man, and accept that your relational experience will likely not change significantly, that you will continue to be a convenient option instead of a deliberate choice, that you will remain in the position of less power in relational dynamics, that you will be valued less precisely because you value more. Or you can recognize that attraction doesn't respond to the logic you wish it did, that the real rules are different from the ideal rules, that playing by rules that no longer exist only ensures you keep losing. You can fundamentally recalibrate your priorities, genuinely putting yourself first. Build a life so complete, so rich, so meaningful, that adding someone is a desired complement, not an essential component. And then watch as the dynamics shift when you stop chasing validation and start simply living in a way that makes external validation irrelevant. When you stop trying to prove your value and start expressing value through how you live, independent of anyone's approval. The second option requires the death of the ego that expects to be loved for convenience and unlimited availability. It requires accepting that you will not be valued for sacrifice. It requires recognizing that healthy relationships are between whole people exchanging value, not incomplete people trying to fill voids. But it is the only path to being chosen for reasons that actually matter, to be genuinely respected instead of conveniently tolerated, to have a relational dynamic where you have as much power as she does, where neither of you is in a position to beg for the other's attention. The man no woman can manipulate hasn't developed an immunity through sophisticated manipulation detection techniques. He has built a life where manipulation is irrelevant because he doesn't need any specific person enough to compromise his values, abandon his priorities, or sacrifice his purposes. He chooses to be in a relationship because it adds value to an already complete life, not because it fills a void in an empty one. And when you finally internalize this, when you stop making the relationship your purpose and start making the relationship a reflection of your existing purposes, something fundamental changes. You stop operating from a position of need and start operating from a position of choice. You stop accepting crumbs and start demanding real reciprocity. You stop tolerating disrespect because you need the connection and start walking away from situations that don't serve you. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from relationships, but freedom within relationships. The freedom to choose without desperation. The freedom to leave without devastation. The freedom to demand standards without the fear of being alone. Because you recognize that being alone while maintaining your dignity is infinitely better than being with someone while sacrificing your self-respect. And paradoxically, this is the exact posture that makes you least likely to be alone. Because when you operate from this position of genuine completeness, when you demand basic reciprocity, when you maintain clear standards, you naturally attract people who are willing to meet you at that level. People who don't see a relationship as an extraction of value, but as an exchange of value. So here is the final truth that no one wants to admit, but that sets you completely free when you accept it. Strategic indifference isn't about not caring. It's about caring more about maintaining your value than about keeping any specific person who doesn't value you properly. It's about building a life where losing someone means losing a part, not losing everything. It's about being chosen because you are valuable, not tolerated because you are convenient. This is the only indifference that matters. And once you achieve it, not as a performance but as the natural result of having built a genuinely complete life, you become exactly the kind of man that quality women compete to be. Not because you manipulated them with tactics, but because you became a version of yourself that naturally commands respect, inspires attraction, and deserves reciprocal investment. The path is clear. The truth has been revealed. The choice is exclusively yours. You can continue as you are and accept more of the same, or you can die to the version of you that needs to be chosen and be reborn as the version that is simply chosen as a natural consequence of being genuinely valuable. This is the truth. Inescapable, endlessly tested, consistent across millions of interactions. You can argue with it. You can resist it. You can wish it were different, but you cannot change it. You can only decide if you will operate by it to your advantage or continue fighting against it at a permanent disadvantage. This is the reality of the modern relational world. And once you see it with total clarity, once you accept it completely, once you act based on it consistently, You will never again operate from a position of weakness. You become exactly what this truth demands: a complete, valuable man chosen because he deserves to be, not tolerated because he begs to be. And that is the ultimate freedom that no amount of excessive availability could ever buy.